In the second part of this video series, we will be configuring our virtual network, installing the operating systems onto our virtual machines, and preparing the virtual machines for Active Directory domain join. Now, in relation to our virtual network, if you're following along and you're not using VMware, do not let this put you off. The process of creating the virtual network and assigning this network to the virtual machines is almost identical no matter the software you're using. Now, the way this works is, within our virtualization software, we create the virtual network adapters we require, and then we apply these network adapters to our virtual machines. It really is that simple. Now, we will be utilizing two virtual networks in this lab configuration. The first network we will label as external, and this will share the physical connection to our host machine. This will give us internet access on our VMs. We will then have a second virtual network which we will label internal, and this will connect our VMs together in their own little private network. Now let's go ahead first and get the operating systems installed onto our virtual machines. So over on VMware, we're going to go to File and New, and we're going to create our virtual machine. So the first one we're going to create is our Windows Server machine. So choose the Windows Server ISO, enter a username, give the virtual machine a name. So this will be our domain controller, DC1. And we're going to click Finish, and let's get our second machine on the go. It's going to be the same ISO, so this is going to be our Exchange server. So again, this will be installed with Server 2016. We will call this Exchange 1, or just Exchange will do. And we will go ahead and we will create our client machine now. So we will locate our Windows 10 ISO, and again we will choose our username, choose the correct edition. We will call this CL1 for our client 1 machine. Okay, so now if we switch on each of these machines, we are going to now go ahead and get our operating systems installed. Okay, so we're going to choose our language here and click install. I'm going to do the same on our Exchange server. And finally on our client machine. Okay, we're going to choose the desktop experience, so we get our full GUI and accept the license terms, custom installation, and we're good to go. We're going to identical process on our Exchange server. And finally our client machine, similar process, and our operating systems are now installing on all three machines. Now, if you are following along and using VMware, an important part of this is to install VMware tools. It's very important that you install VMware tools in the guest operating systems. This provides us a number of extra functionality. The VMware Tools package provides support required for shared folders and for drag and drop operations. So it is recommended that this is installed. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So we go to Edit and Install VMware Tools, and this loads the files onto our D drive. And we can run from here, and this should begin the installation. You can see here that the view is, the display is a little bit off, and one of the benefits of VMware Tools is that it will auto configure display, so we can see a little bit better what we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install this on all three virtual machines. You can see here it's a pretty standard process, typical installation. Let this run and then it will reboot the VMs, and we should have VMware Tools successfully installed. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to name our virtual machines. So if we start with our domain controller, shortcut we can use is sysdm.cpl. Will take us to system properties, and from in here we can change our machine name to DC1, and we will be forced to restart after this. And we will do the same with Exchange. Again, sysdm.cpl, and change this machine name to Exchange1. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to configure our Active Directory. So if we go over to our domain controller, DC1, and if we go to Add Roles and Features, and we're going to install Active Directory Domain Services. So just configure the defaults here, and we can see here Active Directory Domain Services. Configure the defaults. And install. Okay, so Active Directory Domain Services has installed successfully. So now if we go to this little icon here, we can promote this server to a domain controller. So we're going to be adding a new forest here. Just give this a wee second to load. And so the root domain name is danslab.xyz. Okay, we're going to configure the defaults here and choose a password. Make sure you note this one down. This is a very important one. And again, configuring all the defaults here. all the way through, and now we begin the process of promoting this server to a domain. Now, as we touched on earlier, there will be two virtual networks involved in this lab. VMnet17 will be our private network and will connect our VMs together in their own little private network. VMnet15 will be our external network, and this will be bridged to our host network adapter to give us access out to the internet. Now, of course, a server should always have a static IP, so I have configured static IPs for the external adapters, which I will demonstrate in a second. We'll then go on to configure our private network. Now, when you bridge a virtual adapter to your host machine adapter, your router will automatically assign the virtual adapter an IP address in the same network as the host adapter. Your router will perform DHCP for you. Now, for example, if you run an IP config on your host machine and you get an IP of, say, 192.168.0.3, then with network bridging, your VMs will be assigned an IP in the same network range. This will give your VMs access to the internet. The problem with this is when this IP lease expires, your router may assign a different IP to the virtual adapters, and this will cause issues. So in line with best practice, I have assigned an IP address statically to the network adapters. Now let's take a look at this now. Okay, we can see, as explained, our two virtual networks here. So we can see VMnet15 is our external network. It is bridged to our network adapter, and for VMnet7 this is a host-only network, and this will connect our virtual machines together. And you can see here at the bottom the network range for that is 10.0.0.0. So if we look at the setting for our virtual machines, we can see I have already added both VMnet15 and VMnet17 adapters to DC1 and Exchange. And if you look at the network adapters within the machines, we can see I have configured a static IP on both servers. Now, to reiterate, if you want to know what static IP address you should be giving to these adapters when using a bridged network, simply perform an IP config on your host machine to confirm network range. So, if your host machine IP is 192.168.0.3, for example, you will be able to provide your machines with an IP ranging from 192.168.0.3 from anything up to 192.168.0.254. Remember though that your router uses DHCP and will already have assigned away some of the lower numbers to other devices in your household, such as mobile phones and iPads. This is why I have chosen numbers higher in the range so as to avoid any conflicts. We will now configure our private network, which will allow our machines to communicate with each other in a simulated on-prem domain. And just to demonstrate how we would add these networks here, in VMware, you go to Hardware, add a network, and we can choose our VMnet7. And of course, we're going to add this adapter to all three machines. So we have already added our external adapter. We are now adding our internal adapter to all three of these VMs. So VMnet7. So we are configuring our internal network on Exchange and DC1. Now we're not actually going to touch our client machine at the moment. The reason for that is we are going to let DHCP do its magic for our client machine. So for our external adapter on our client machine, our router will provide it with an IP, and for the internal network we are going to In the next video, we'll configure DHCP in our domain, and our DHCP will push out an IP address to our internal network. So this isn't a server, we don't need a static IP, so DHCP should be absolutely fine for what we want to do. So again, we will configure that in the next video. So over on our Exchange server, we are going to configure our static IP address for our private network. So Ethernet 1 is our private network, so that's VMnet 17, and we add an IP address. So it is an 10 network, so I'm going to give this an IP address of 10.0.0.3, subnet mask of 255.255.255. If I can get my keyboard to work here, and default gateway, although not important, that this is an internal network, 10.0.0.1. We don't actually need that. For our DNS server, 10.0.0.2, which will be the IP address of our domain controller. So of course we're pointing, this is going to be a member server, we're going to add this to our domain, so we're pointing that to our domain controller. So if we go over to our domain controller and we configure an IP address for this server also. So ncpa.cpl for quick access to network connections, properties. So this is the same process as I did on the Exchange server. Okay, so 10.0.0.2, subnet mask, of course, the same, 255.255.255. And for the preferred DNS server, it's going to be this server here, so we'll point it to itself. You can use 10.0.0.2 or just the loopback address. So for DC1 and Exchange, we now have configured our internal network, so we should be able to ping. So check to make sure, yeah, we've got our static IP address for both our internal and external network, and if we ping DC1 from Exchange, we get a reply, and if we do the same from DC1 to Exchange, just to make sure everything is working as it should be here, and we get reply. So we are now ready for domain join. So we're going to add our Exchange server to our domain controller as a member server. So to do that, over on DC1, sorry, over on Exchange rather, if we go to sysdm.cpl and to system properties, and all we have to do here is click on domain and pop in the name of our domain, which is danslab.xyz in my case, and we will be prompted for administrative rights. And we should get a successful message to say that we have successfully joined to our domain, and we will restart now. Okay, so we should now have the option to log into our domain. Click other user first, and we're going to log into our domain now rather than the local server. Okay, so we have successfully logged into our domain. And if we go back to system properties, just to get confirmation here that this Exchange server, there we go, is now a member server for danslab.xyz. Okay, in the final part of this video, we're going to configure DHCP in our domain so that we can automatically assign or dynamically assign IP addresses to our client machine and to any other machines that we add on if we decide to add to this lab as we go. To get this up and running, we go over to our domain controller, over to DC1. And we go to Manage, Add Roles and Features, and of course we're going to add, to configure the defaults here, we're going to add DHCP server. And install. All pretty basic stuff here. Okay, so DHCP has installed. We click on the little icon here to complete our DHCP configuration. Okay, I'm using my standard administrative account for this. And we now go to Tools, DHCP, and we can now configure our scope. So if we just maximize this here, and if we look for IPv4, we're going to create a scope, of course, in our network range, which is 10.0.0.0. Give it a name. Okay, so we're going to choose 10.0.0.100 to 10.0.0.120. Make sure we've got our subnet mask correct. I keep this number pretty high so we don't accidentally clash with any of our server IP addresses. Don't want to create a conflict for our default gateway. 10.0.0.1, configure all the defaults here, and we have now configured our DHCP scope. So back on client 1, if we disable and enable the network adapter, this should automatically assign an IP address from that scope. I'll just confirm that this is working. And you can see here it's been given an IP address of 10.0.0.100, so we have successfully configured DHCP, and now we should be able to go and get this client machine joined to our domain. Same process as with Exchange Server, System Properties, click on Domain, danslab.xyz, and again just your standard administrator account. Got there eventually, and we should get a confirmation that our client machine is also part of our domain. In this video, we have successfully configured our domain, and we now have a functioning on-prem environment. In the next video in this series, we will begin the process of configuring our hybrid environment. We will sign up for our Office 365 E5 trial and purchase our domain and hosting. We will then, using the AD Connect tool, migrate our on-prem domain to the cloud, creating our hybrid setup.